got Mark Mullins here with Fluke Networks, so thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. No one told me I had to go on after a dog.
I mean, it's...
yeah,
really.
That's a tough spot. That's like
a discount or something.
Tough, man. It's tough.
We'll see what we can do. If not, you can always go out and check them out, and you can also pet them, and they're just amazing.
That's very cool.
Yeah, it's really awesome. Next time I'm going to hold one. Well, let's get the show started. So the role of Ethernet has evolved in the Pro AV industry over the years. So can you speak to the ways that it's changed and what have been some of the major drivers in the evolution of this?
Well, sure. There are two things I think that have made Ethernet so popular in the AV industry. The first is that you can carry so much over a single cable. You're going to replace lots of different cables with just a single Ethernet cable. And then the other one is that there's a standardized low-cost method of cabling. It's all the same, right? And that makes installing it easier, it makes it cheaper, and it also probably makes it more reliable because you're not dealing with all these different types of cables for different types of signals.
Well, Mark, as we continue to see, the category cables evolve, right? Most of us familiar with Cat 5, Cat 6, but a lot of us don't actually know what that means, right? Whether it's bandwidth capabilities, whether it's PoE capabilities. What are some of the modern innovations that you're seeing people leverage through these category cables?
Well, I guess the thing you see is that the higher performance cabling is allowing higher frequency signals to carry over the same pair. I mean, when we first got in the business in the early 90s, people were astounded that you could get 10 megabits a second across just a simple twisted pair cable. And now I've seen demonstrations of that level of technology on like barbed wire. And on regular twisted pair cable now, it's a whole different kind of a twisted pair cable, but you can easily do 10 gigabits per second, and that is a 10,000 times increase in terms of the performance. That's based on, of course, the cabling's being redesigned. We've gone from Cat 5e to Cat 6 to Cat 6a, and Cat 8, maybe someday on the horizon. And then the electronics, of course, that allow you to use that. That means you can put a lot more things on the cable. And then the other thing is now that we've added power over Ethernet, that's just one more thing you can add to the cable. And you only need one, right?
Ideally, yes.
That's all you need. So why is proper cabling so critical in the use of Ethernet in Pro AV applications, and what are the potential consequences if you don't adhere to those standards?
Well, so let's look at like a Category 6A cable spec. I'm sure you're all familiar with that spec and what the insertion loss requirements are at, say, 500 megahertz. It's 56 dB, as we all know. And that doesn't mean anything to most people, but what that means is that the cable can lose 99% of the signal from where it starts out to where it goes and still work. Now that's a lot of loss. You'd think that's amazing, but I talked about those electronics that make that possible. But the thing is, it can't lose much more than that or it won't work anymore. So it's very important to accurately measure the performance of that cable so that you're only losing the 99%. It sounds like a lot, but it will still work. And that when you go to use it, then it's going to be able to actually work. Now, most manufacturers require full-up certification. It also protects the installer and the contractor, because if I can say, hey, I certified this cable, I know it's good, here's the reports, then you know that I did my job, and I know that you can't really come back and say, well, these cables aren't any good, because I've got a report that says it was, you accepted it. So it really keeps things much smoother in the industry for people to have certified cable.
Well, what's important too, you mentioned certified cable. A lot of times the industry has kind of known IP cabling as a little bit, we'll call it less robust than your traditional XLR, a lot of your fiber cables, a lot of your SDI cables, things like that. So testing is a critical part of that, right?
Right.
Making sure that the connectivity is actually working and functioning properly. Talked about some of those challenges that it comes to whenever you're talking about testing cables for functionality.
Well, you're talking about Ethernet, and one thing about Ethernet that you'll find that's really amazing is how robust it actually is. It will work in the face of lots of different kinds of problems, and unfortunately it will also mask those problems so you don't see them when you're actually in operation. I got an example here on one of our testers that I like to show. I don't know if hopefully you can see that out there. What this is, we've got a cable that we tested. This is a result I stored, and if you look at it carefully here, there's a wire map. So there's 4 pairs in an Ethernet cable, so 8 conductors. And if you look here carefully, you can see the number 4 one is broken. It's not working. They think, well, okay, it's good, I caught that, the cable failed, I won't have that problem. But here's the thing, if I hadn't tested that cable, it would still work. You might notice down here it says, this cable is capable of handling 10 meg and 100 meg traffic. Now you get a red X on the 10G, that means it won't handle 10 gig, and that's what I wanted to test it to. But the thing is this cable actually will work, and this is what the tester's telling me, it will work for 10 meg and 100 meg. So let's say out in the real world I didn't test this cable, I hook it up, Ethernet will say, okay, I can't work at 100 or at gig, I'll just downshift to 100 meg, and now I'm getting 1/10 of the bandwidth I thought I needed to get the job done. Now, in the IT world, that's not a big deal. That means your email might get retransmitted, and you might get it 10 seconds later than you would have otherwise. Nobody cares, right? I don't want to get email anyway half the time.
Right.
So that's a big problem. But if that's on a live video stream and I start losing packets, there's no time to retransmit them, and suddenly my video quality just goes down the tubes. But I don't know why, and it could be a disastrous time to try and figure out why it isn't working. And that's why being able to test the cable and looking at the performance of the cable is so important beforehand, because Ethernet really hides a lot of those kinds of problems.
Interesting. So can you elaborate on the maintenance requirements associated with using Ethernet in Pro AV, and how do you differ from traditional versus traditional AV setups?
Well, so now what's, in the old school AVs, you'd have cables for audio, cables for video, cables for power. You'd probably have also other control cables that are controlling different things. And now you put all that on one cable, right? Well, in the old days, for example, if you wanted to troubleshoot a power cable, I'd whip out my Fluke DMM and go in there and probe it. I got 120 volts, I'm good. With the new cabling where I put everything on that, I can't just use basic tools like that anymore, right? I have to have a custom-built tool, kind of like this one, that can go in and look at that cable and look at all the things that are going on it. What's going on with the power? Are the signals okay? Is the cable okay? What's going on? Now, it might sound like that's going to make it harder, but I think in the long run that makes it easier, because you've just got one cable to troubleshoot, you can use one tool, shows you all the different things that are going on that cable, and then you can go in and figure out which thing to fix, as opposed to, in the old days, I'd need an entire toolbox full of products to be able to test a video cable, an audio cable, a power cable, etc. So I think it makes it easier, but you do have to have the right kind of tools to do that job.
Well, I wanted to follow up too. You talk about having the right tools. You also have to have the actual right cable, right? One of the things that we see a lot in the AV industry is retrofits. People think they have really robust systems and failovers, and it turns out that their switch is their fail point, or they've got bad cables. What are some pieces of advice that you give to people, especially in the AV community, as maybe they're looking to retrofit some of these old and existing infrastructures?
Well, I guess I'd say, the one thing is that in certifying the performance of the cable is really important. We had a couple of guys by this morning that came in with a big cable, and he called it his, I don't know what he called it, his mystery cable. And it was one that they used to set up for shows, and when he plugged it in, he could get 10 gigabit Ethernet across it, so that was great. But then when he tried to run HD-based-T over it, it wouldn't work. He said the quality was really, really poor. Why is this cable doing this? I'm not sure what's wrong. So he said, bring it over and let us test it with a full-blown certifier. And what we found was that the resistance in some of the pairs was just too high, and that can make the cable basically not work very well. And a lot of times you won't find these things. As I said, you plug it in, it seems to work, I think it's okay, but then somebody might change something, as you said, they might plug in a different switch, it has a little different characteristics, and now it doesn't work very well anymore. If you'd certified that cable to Cat 6, or Cat 6A in this case, he wouldn't have had this problem, because he would have known it was bad right out of the gate. So you have to be careful. I'd always recommend using well-known brands of cabling. There's a lot of them out there. We act as kind of a judge in terms of cabling, and so people ask us, so which is the best one? And we really try to stay out of that argument. But one of the things is, if you stay with any of the big brands, we rarely, if ever, see any problems with that. If you go buy the cheapest thing you can find on Amazon, I like Amazon, I buy a lot of stuff on Amazon, but I wouldn't recommend buying the cheapest cable out there that you can find, because that's where this cable came from that these guys were using, and it met most of the performance specifications, but not all of them.
Well, Mark, we appreciate you coming on the show today. Obviously, as a Pro AV community, still relatively in the infancy of the ways that we can maximize the use of some of these cables. So we appreciate you coming on. We appreciate the work that Fluke's doing to help teach our measly little Pro AV souls over here. But thank you so much for coming on the show.
All right, thank you very much.